Hello, good afternoon. It is the Weekly Word Live, where every week we get to discuss some things, talk about what's going on, but more importantly, kind of look under the hood of some of the reasons why we do things, why we communicate things here at LifePoint, and the bigger picture of who God is. So
that's right.
Today, of course, it's Pastor Matt Clark and Pastor Phil Ayers, and what we want to do is we're going to follow up from this Sunday's sermon.
Yeah.
You've been doing a series. What's the name of it?
Stuff Christians Should Know.
Stuff Christians Should Know.
Yeah.
And this particular Sunday was on money.
Right. Nobody likes to talk about money in the church.
No.
That's the. Let's see. If you had the top 3 worst things to talk about, money, sex, and hell. Those are the. I don't know if that's the right order, but people.
It could be.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Uncomfortable to talk about. So, but anyway, I like talking about money in the church, not because I'm a pastor and I get paid and all that, but because I truly believe money is it's the key to spiritual growth. When you figure out what God wants you to do with your money and you start spending it that way, it brings a ton of joy and excitement and spiritual growth. So I like it because I think it sets people free.
Well, it's just another tool I feel God uses to urge us and push us to the direction of trust.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like the most tangible version of that, because it has to do with a bottom line, like what's in your account. So, there's some questions that we're going to go over today.
Absolutely.
And these are usually for me like the most asked questions. But I want to say, if you're watching on YouTube and you have like a question you're dying to ask, you can post it on YouTube, and if there's any questions at the end of this, we'll try to answer those too.
Absolutely.
About money. I mean, I don't know.
Those other 2 subjects we're not prepared for.
Right. We don't want to talk about those things at all. So I'm going to monitor over here on my computer whether anybody posts a comment. But so let's jump into some of these questions. What do we got?
The first question is, should I give to the church or others? So I'm assuming that means the body of Christ that you go to, the specific church, or others in community, nonprofit organizations, missions, etc.
I hit the wrong button. I got the wrong question up there. Give me a second. Because I have problems with my technology. There it is. Okay. Should I give to others of the church? So when people ask this, it's basically they want to know if they have a certain amount of money that they're going to donate.
Right.
Are they supposed to donate all of that to the church? Or can they donate some of that to the church and some of that to other ministries? Maybe like a missionary or something like that.
Spread the wealth.
Spread the wealth around. So here's what I think about that. I think it's totally between you and God where you put your money. And we're going to talk about this a little bit in the next question, but in the Old Testament, the synagogue represented sort of a storehouse for where people tithed, and we'll get to that in a second, but they gave some of their crops and harvest, and then that was distributed throughout the town. And so you were sort of commanded to bring that money to the storehouse. That's where it was supposed to go, your gifts. But in the New Testament, things are quite a bit different. Now, the church really isn't like the synagogue anymore. The church is quite different, actually. It's a group of people. And so some people feel like, okay, well, I want to do what they did in the Old Testament. I want to bring all of my tithe to the church. And if you want to do that, that's okay. That's really your conviction. But there's really nowhere in the Bible, in the New Testament specifically, where it says that you can't sort of spread that around. And you can see that in the New Testament where certain churches gave some money to Paul and some to some other people. And obviously they had some for their own uses. So basically, the answer to that question is yes. You can give to the church. You can give to others. You can spread it around 50-50. If you're more comfortable because the church also gives to missions and we also take some of that money you give and we put it back into the community, that's fine too. But it's really up to you.
Right.
The important thing is that you're giving at some level.
Right.
I think is the more important thing.
And I think the other piece to that is while potentially mom and dad or just a mom or just a dad, depending on the family unit, generally makes that decision on where money goes and where money's spent, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes discussing and talking about it with the family as far as what are the opportunities to give towards.
Yeah.
And as a family unit going, maybe the kids or your teens being involved and going, I know that we've got this kind of thing that maybe it's a certain amount that you've, which is a special amount that you've got that you're going to give, that they may go, well, we want to support this local missionary as well, or this nonprofit organization as well, and maybe
Right.
they have a voice or an idea to give towards those things, which may help.
I mean, without belaboring this topic too much, I know there's a lot of pastors who wouldn't agree with that because it sounds like, no, if you don't give your money to the church isn't going to survive.
Right.
What I think is when people truly understand generosity and giving, which is what my goal is, then there's enough money to go around. There's enough money to support the church. There's enough money to support the community. There's enough to support missions. The reality is, many people don't give very much or anything because they misunderstand about giving.
Well, and how many times, especially at Life Point, from what I understand as well, that if there is a need, and we say families are giving towards other things out there, and not necessarily to Life Point, to take that example, we sometimes share the need in saying, hey, here's where we're at in the reality. We're not going to cover it up or anything. And people rise to the occasion in generosity to give.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's the beauty that we continually see. Okay, so what you mentioned this word, and some people get confused, but what is a tithe? Is that an official?
Yeah, so this is very confusing, and I will try to say, for the most part, you hear us at Life Point not using that word.
Right, we're trying to use the word offering, although it's habit.
I want to say tithe all the time, too.
Our upbringing.
Tithe simply means a tenth. Okay, so it means a tenth. That's just the definition of the word. So if somebody says, I'm going to give a tithe, what they're saying is, I'm going to give a tenth. Right. Which is weird, because some people go, well, I tithe 5% of my income. Which, that doesn't make sense. You can't say, I'm tenthing 5% of my income.
You're 5%ing a 10.
Right. 10. So it simply means 10. And where the word comes from is the Old Testament. It's a part of the Old Testament law that was given to the Israelites by Moses. I'll read the verse here, one of the verses. It's mentioned several times. But in the book of Leviticus, chapter 27, verse 10, chapter 27, verse 30, it says, every tithe of the land, so every tenth of the land, whether of the seed of the land or the fruit of the trees, is the Lord's. It's holy to the Lord. And it says, every tithe of herds and flocks, every tenth of animal that pass under the herdsman's staff shall be holy. So the idea is everything that you owned as an ancient Israelite, 10% of it basically belonged to God. Right. And you were supposed to give that back to Him. So when we say tithe, it means tenth. Now the reason why it's sort of confusing in our day and age is that we're not under the Old Testament law. Now, you might have been a part of a church that preached 10% giving as part of that Old Testament law. And the truth is, 10% might be a good...
maybe a good launching point.
It may be a good launching point. It may be a good principle. That might be an amount that's good for somebody. But because we're not under the Old Testament law anymore, I don't believe, and from my reading in the New Testament, that we're held to 10%, meaning that's what we have to give. As a matter of fact, that's our next question, right? Should I be giving 10%?
Right. Should I give 10%?
And the answer to that question is, if that's what you can give cheerfully, then the answer is yes.
Right.
If 10%, you look at your budget, and 10% is a lot. Like with the 10%, you can't make your bills. You're not going to be able to, put food on the table or whatever. Well, then that's obviously too much, right? But the interesting thing is, for some people, 10% isn't even close to enough.
Right.
Right. Now, the model in the New Testament that we see is the disciples and the apostles and the early believers, they gave usually way more than 10%. In many cases, they gave everything. They just put it all into one big circle. So I think the better principle is from 2 Corinthians 9:6. I think you read this at church on Sunday. It says, each person should decide what to give in their heart. Right. Not under compulsion, out of guilt, but with a cheerful heart. And sometimes the problem with 10% is you feel guilty if you don't give it, like you're not giving enough. Right. And I feel like, and a bunch of people have said this to me, they feel like I could never give 10%, so they give nothing. because they figure God's already
Mad at him,
yeah,
angry.
He's already displeased with me because I can't get to the 10%, so I won't give anything. But what's much more clear from the Bible is figure out the amount that you can give, and then that you can give cheerfully, and then give that. For some people, it's 10%. For some people, it's $10.
Right.
For some people, it's $1. It doesn't matter as long as you can give that cheerfully with the right attitude. The amount isn't important as far as the new.
And the challenge would be to continue to always, we pray about our daily needs, what's going on in our life, praying for our friends, people at the hospital, but sometimes even praying, God, what is it that you want to work in me, and how do you want me to kind of spend this, and how do I invest in the kingdom, not necessarily just at LifePoint, but in the kingdom as a whole. So I think always evaluating that is important to be thinking about. Absolutely. All right, so the next question is net or gross? Net or gross?
Yes.
Which is usually after taxes, it's pretty gross.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a question that I've been asked a bunch of times, and it's a great question.
Dave Ramsey has been asked
this is a Dave Ramsey question, is it? Well, here's how I look at it. Let's say we go to lunch. Let's say Matt and I go to lunch.
We're going to lunch. Where are we going?
Ruth Chris.
Okay, I'm taking someone else to lunch.
But let's say we go to lunch or something, and the server comes to the table, does a really, really good job, okay? And we get the check, and let's say it's $100.
Right.
Okay? Which is, by the way, we would never spend that much on a lunch.
No.
But for the sake of the illustration. So, but the question might be, do I tip on the net or the gross? Like, do I tip on just the price of the food, or do I tip on the food and the tax?
Right.
What do you do?
The total amount.
Total amount. So you tip on with the tax.
Yeah.
Because some people don't.
Yeah. But it also, depends. Was it a good steak?
Well, here's the question.
No. The bigger. I always value the person.
Yes.
Typically, in which we're not talking about. Tips. We're talking about tithe or
Well,
offering,
but there's a principle there.
But it's.
Are you grateful for the service that you received,
right.
and do you want to bless this person?
Right.
That's the more important question, isn't it?
I think we tend to judge people with our tips.
Well, that's
that was a horrible service, so you're not getting anything. You're losing your quarters, kind of thing. They put a stack of quarters and they take away every time the tea doesn't get filled up. But that's not the idea.
Well, and see, some people view giving that same way.
Yeah.
Right? They view giving that exact same way. It's like, what has God done for me, and then I'll give back. But the principle is all about generosity. So it really doesn't matter. If you want to do your offering based on your net income, and then maybe when you get your tax return, do another offering on that, that's fine. Or if you're like, no, I want to give based on my gross income,
right.
That's fine too. But really, it doesn't matter as long as generosity is at the heart of it. The same with at the restaurant. If you see this person's working hard, they're doing a good job, you want to be generous, whether it's on net or gross. That's the key.
And wouldn't you agree that question generally comes out of the fact that people would be thinking of a specific number,
well, of course,
10%.
And trying to, please God,
right.
Or like you're not getting enough.
In the past, it's been, if I'm supposed to give 10%, was what most people thought. Is it on the net or gross? Well,
right.
When it's not even about the 10% in the first place, the net or gross
right.
doesn't really matter anyways.
Right.
It's not a factor in essence.
Exactly.
Okay, so what if I can't afford it?
Okay, that's a great question. There's two things. Thank you for
I read it myself.
So this is a reality for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, there's like three things that I go with this. Number one is everybody can afford to give as long as you're not holding yourself to some number. Okay, so there again, there's an important principle. But you may be in a case, maybe single mom, maybe you've gone through some financial difficulties, lost a job, maybe a health risk or something, or health issue, and so you really are, you might have given X amount before, now you're behind on everything. So if you truly can't afford to give, then I don't think you should give. Or you should give a very small amount that you can still be very consistent with. Siri is listening to me. And I have seen people do that. I've seen people who were giving a couple $100 a week, and they went through something, and they moved it to $5 a week.
Right.
And because they still wanted to be consistent as they were getting, out. So that's sort of the first thing. The second thing is, there is a situation I see a lot of people in where they could give, they could be generous toward the church, but their finances are so out of control. They don't necessarily have an earning problem; they have a spending problem.
Right.
And so they have so much debt or so much irresponsible spending that they don't have anything left for God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're in that situation where you can't afford it, my suggestion is, let's work on your budget so that you can be generous to God first.
That's a sign of another problem.
That's a different problem.
Right.
Right.
That's
right.
not. It's not a sign of whether or not I have enough income. It's whether or not. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a spending problem.
Yeah. But if you truly, and I know there have been people where they're getting food assistance.
Right.
They don't have transportation. I mean, it gets bad. Then no, I don't believe that that's the way you should be giving back at that moment in time. Because if you do, you're just, again, trying to meet some kind of man-made number.
Standard.
Instead you might find at that point in time that it's good to give in other ways until you can reestablish yourself and be consistent at some level later.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's good. Good. Okay, so last question of the list is, what if don't tell my wife I asked this, what if my spouse disagrees on tithing or offering, giving?
That happens all the time.
So, and no, my wife probably taught me how to give on a regular basis. Yeah.
Shout out to Stephanie.
She was always a faithful giver.
Yeah.
In all of our dating and married life, and she actually taught me how to actually do it. And
that's smart.
Yeah,
gentlemen, listen to your wives.
Yes,
that's an important principle.
But the question is, what if my spouse disagrees? And how do you answer that potential conflict?
Right, conflict is the right word, because we do have people that go to that are part of our congregation and in other churches where maybe the husband's a believer and the wife isn't, or vice versa. And so you have a person who wants to give back to the church, but the other person doesn't feel like it's worth it, doesn't buy into it.
They don't value it.
Right, it could cause some conflicts. So my advice is usually to, one, don't allow this to be the conflict. Because I know that spouse, the believing spouse, really wants to lead that other person into a relationship with Christ and bring them into the church. So this doesn't need to be the thing that you argue about.
It doesn't need to be a barrier.
Exactly.
But
I would say a lot of times, most couples, they kind of have their own money. And usually it doesn't bother the other person if I'm going to spend out of my money.
Right.
Or, sometimes couples, I don't know if you guys do this, but my wife and I will have, we each take a little bit of money, a little spending money each week, and it's just kind of for whatever, no questions asked, And so you might want to say, well, I'm going to spend out of my, what would you call it?
Sludge fund.
Slush fund, whatever.
Sludge? Is it sludge or slush?
I think it's slush.
I don't know.
But we have my wife and I call it walking around money. If you want to buy a Coke somewhere.
Yeah, I got some of that, by the way. It's $1. $1. That's my walking around money.
But you could spend out of that, and usually that won't anger the spouse, right? And but I just really that's one of those things where you can talk to that person and see if you can work it out. But I don't think it's the hill you want to sort of fight on as far as your spirituality. And I feel like God understands that. And in those situations, I've often recommended if they really if their spouse is really against it, well then just find other ways to serve and give back, because there are plenty of ways that you can serve and give back besides monetarily. I mean, I believe that everybody that has the ability to give something should give something. That's from the scriptures. The amount isn't as important as just the generosity and consistency. But if you get yourself into a situation like this, well, then you can serve too. I mean, or serve instead until maybe you get to a place where...
And maybe you have some gifts or talents that you can contribute in different ways as well. So
for sure.
That you're able to do. So
yeah.
All right. So this isn't on here, but the final question is there anything else that you and I'm asking you off the cuff here, but anything from Sunday as you finished up money that you were asked afterward or that popped in your head about money that you want to share?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm glad that you asked that. So a guy grabbed me after the service. He literally grabbed me. He was like, "Come here." He's like, "You forgot something." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "You forgot how to tell everybody how to be content." Because a big part of the sermon was that money won't make you happy.
Right.
And the love of money is what's the root of all evil. It's this wanting more and more. And so the difference there is being content with God, with what God gave you. So the question is, how do you be content?
And that will be a next series on how to be. No.
It's a great question because I think I even mentioned it. I'm often not content.
Right.
Not that I want big fancy cars or whatever. Are we
So
back?
I don't know if we're here. Let's see if we're back.
Oh. I'm such a dummy. I think my computer. It's a great question because I think I even mentioned it. I'm often not content.
Right. What if my spouse disagrees?
Big fancy cars or whatever.
Oh man, we had so much good content.
We had good content.
No, we got,